Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Alissa Knight, author of Hacking Connected Cars. Alissa, welcome to the show.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Are you ready to get started?
I am.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
I'm going to answer your question with an anecdote.
Sure.
That's okay. So, have you heard of the story of two explorers by the name of Amundsen and Scott called the 20-Mile March?
I have not.
So it's a story of two explorers on an expedition race to the South Pole in 1911. It was roughly 1,400 miles long, and both teams actually traveled the same distance through extremely harsh weather conditions, inclement weather. And Scott's team walked as far as they could on good weather days, and on the bad weather days, Scott's team would rest. And Amundsen's team walked 20 miles every day, no more, no less. Even though they could walk more than that, they didn't. They stopped at 20 miles, but they did it consistently every single day. It was consistent action. So between the two teams, who do you think actually made it?
I wonder.
Amundsen. So Amundsen's team, consistent action. So my answer to you is consistent action. That would be my advice. Making sure that you write, even if it's just a little, but writing every day is really my advice.
Yeah, it's just getting into that power of habit and being consistent, because when you build those habits, that's what's going to help build momentum. And one thing I always tell my clients is this: progress is progress. If you wrote an extra 2 or 3 words today, well, guess what? You made progress. And having that habit of doing it consistently, it's just such a huge advantage to have versus necessarily just writing on the fly, so to speak.
Exactly. And this is my first book. So, I don't have experience as a writer. So that was, I think, one of my biggest challenges in writing this book was that consistent action, making sure that I write a little bit each day. What I would do is I would backload it towards the end of the chapter deadline with my publisher and just basically push it off. And it really was a struggle doing it that way, and things started to turn around once I just started writing each and every day.
And would you mind sharing with us the publisher that you use? And obviously we won't dig too much into that, but what is the publisher that you're using for your launch?
Sure. Wiley & Sons is the publisher.
Okay. So in regards to that first part, now you've got that done. Now, what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published from this point?
Well, what my process is, and it's going to be an interesting answer. So with me, I came up with this book idea. I noticed that there weren't any books on hacking connected cars out there. There really wasn't much information in this area. It's a very labyrinthine area of cybersecurity research, and there aren't that many people who know how to do it. And so even online, there isn't really much out there except YouTube videos on people proving that it can be done. So vulnerability research is certainly limited in this area just because there's a lack of subject matter expertise. But for me, I came up with this book idea. I wrote, I thought of some of the more major publishers in the industry, Wiley, Pact Publishing. I went to their website and I just read about, okay, how do I submit a book idea? How do I get my, how do I apply to do this? And I just followed their instructions on their website. They even had a downloadable template that I could fill out for submitting the book idea and the outline. So I literally spent probably 2-3 hours on this, filled out the application, submitted it to them, and I would say that I heard back from Wiley within a matter of days, a few days after that. I would say that the hardest part about getting published was really just trying to think of all of the different components and the actual structure of the book. I would say that the answer would probably be the outline. I knew what I wanted to write about. Obviously, I had the technical acumen to do this work, so writing to it wasn't difficult. It was really just fleshing out the outline of the book. And that's really where I spent a lot of my time. And there was a lot of back and forth with the publisher on the outline versus the actual chapters or the content of the book. So I would say that the hardest part for me was really just fleshing out, putting more color around the outline of the book and the chapters.
Well, let's talk a little bit about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you're planning to use in your book launch that you feel is going to work well.
Well, obviously, Wiley has a marketing team that where they do their work. For me, on my side, I speak at roughly a dozen conferences per year. So, and that's across the United States, Europe, and Asia. So I'll travel around and speak at cybersecurity conferences. And that's my plan for marketing the book. In each and every conference, I'm going to have copies of the book available for the attendees to purchase there at the show, where I'll, sign the book and also speak about the book in my presentation. So I'll keynote at a lot of these conferences. So it'll give me a platform to speak about it and give more information on, where they can buy it and what the book's about.
Well, and having that book too available at the conferences, that's going to be a really big game changer because that just adds even more additional authority. Plus, you're able to use that book as a business card essentially to really help with the back end.
Exactly. And there's security conferences like Black Hat Briefings, DEF CON, where they will have an author's corner where there will be other authors there at the security conference that will have their books available and also be there for signing. So these conferences actually really try and help authors getting their books out there and getting exposure. So these are great platforms to do that at.
Well, and the other thing with that too is one thing I've noticed. I think every business at this point, I think the prerequisite you have to have that book now just to be able to take that business to the next level to really establish that authority in your brand.
I agree. I agree. It's definitely personal brand building.
So these were the easy questions. Now are you ready for the hard questions?
Sure, shoot.
So this is the one we always find as the hardest one, and that is, what is your favorite book? And what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
Yeah, I'm writing a book on hacking connected cars, so my answer may puzzle you. I actually am a total nerd when it comes to time management and productivity hacks. So I read a lot of these types of books. I want to say that I want to say that the answer is not actually a security book, rather a book on productivity and time management. There's a great author by the name of Simon Sinek who's published a number of books in this area, leadership development and just personal development in general. And he wrote a great book called Start with Why. And I really ingrained the lessons from that book into the fabric of my life, where people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're not all walking around with a Creative Labs MP3 player around in our pocket. We're walking around with iPods or iPhones that play MP3s. And the reason why is not because Apple came out with the first MP3 player. They actually came out with it several months after Creative Labs came out with theirs. Creative Labs was actually the first MP3 player on the market. And the reason why we're not carrying those instead of an iPod is because Creative Labs told us what it did, and Apple told us why we needed it. And so, I've basically made sure that everything that I do in my life, that I understand the why I'm doing it versus what it is and how it is I'm doing it. So I would say that would be my favorite book and one that I learned the most from.
And for our final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
Ooh, that's a good question, actually. My favorite quote would be from Abraham Lincoln, who said, "If I had 8 hours to cut down a tree, I would spend the first 6 hours sharpening my axe." And the reason why I do that is because people will often make fun of me that I need a project plan just to get a cup of coffee. Uh, but I love planning, and I really don't think that anything should be done first without planning. So I guess it really expounds on my first answer to your first question, and is really just making sure that you have a plan in place before you start or do anything. And I would say that's would be what I live my life by.
Same here. I'm all about systems, frameworks, and processes. I use it to build my publishing business and now my podcasting business. It works, but you have to have that game plan to get started.
Agreed, agreed. I mean, I would probably go as far to say is that I'm very OCD about planning and time management, but I really don't like to start any project as much as there's this impetus to just drive right in and either start hacking or start writing. I really believe that before you do anything or cut, if you will, that you measure twice. And that's done through planning.
Absolutely. Well, Alyssa, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Sure. I typically can be found most of the time on LinkedIn or Twitter. My Twitter handle is at Alissa Knight. It's ALISSAKNIGHT. And LinkedIn as well as linkedin.com/in/Alissa Knight.
Well, Alyssa, I want to thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.